All right, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Betsy Butterick, the Coach's Coach and Communications Specialist, and I appreciate you tuning in for Win the Moment, Mental Skills for Uncertain Times. We know that how we think about situations largely determines our experience of them, and that's why I'm so excited today to be able to share this virtual space with three exceptional mental skills specialists. What's unique about this group is that everyone on today's panel was an athlete and then a coach before becoming the specialists that they are today. In addition, they're not only exceptional in their field, but they're also high quality human beings. So Tami, Piers, Vera Jo, thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to begin by asking each of you, and we'll go in that order, Tami, Piers, VJ, give us a brief background about yourself and then who you work with now. And also, if you would please include your preferred pronouns for our audience, that would be great. Tami, let's start with you.
Okay. I started college. I played basketball and tennis in college, and then got into coaching tennis, which led to coaching men and women's tennis at the Division I and Division II level, and was just, interested in how strong you could become with your mind. And that led to researching, studying, and led into the job I do now, which is a mental skills coach. And I say I have the best job in America. I get to work with athletes, coaches, parents, and just trying to make mindset stronger and build confidence.
Thank you, Tami. Piers, let's go over to you.
Hey everyone, my name is Piers and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And, similar to Tami, grew up playing sports, went into coaching. And what I figured out was that what I really loved about coaching was that element of, how does one kid get back up from a mistake and why when one kid makes a mistake, you have to pull them out of the game. And it was the motivation and the mental skills that I loved as a coach. And I figured out I could do that full time instead of just coaching one sport. So my training and my education are in sport and performance psychology, resilience psychology, positive psychology. And my passion is like taking the nerdy research stuff from those fields and making them really usable and accessible for people in different jobs and performances. So I do that full time for the military as a contractor with the Army Resilience Directorate. A lot of my experience comes from working with high-risk occupations, so military, law enforcement, firefighters, nurses. And then through my side hustle, I also do that same work with the athletes and coaches at Colorado College.
Excellent. Thank you, Piers. And VJ, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Vera Jo. I played college basketball at Adams State University, went on to play professional basketball in Greece, coached 7 years in college, 2 years D2, 5 years D1. And most recently, I just stepped away to continue with this mental training. I work with athletes, coaches, business professionals, and, a little bit like Piers and Tami, agreed, the best job in the world. I got a lot of my experience firsthand. Playing overseas in Greece, even in college, I learned that to set myself apart from the rest, I had to develop something different, and that started here. So I just wanted to get away from the rest of the pack, and I knew that for me and my build and physicality, it wasn't going to be anything physical. So I went deeper into the knowledge and the experience of building up my mind.
Excellent. And I love that all of you have the playing and coaching experience because I think it brings a unique perspective to the dialogue that we're going to have today, knowing that there's administrators and coaches and student athletes on today's call. Talk a little bit, if you will, about how in the absence of sport, and VJ just mentioned, physicality, I needed to do something additional. Many student athletes right now have lost the ability to practice their sport, to practice the skills related to their sport in the way that they're used to. Talk a little bit, if you will, about how working on the mental game can benefit their future performance, and in what way can they start to do that? Anyone can kick it off. This is a free-flowing conversation.
I'll go first. One of the things that I'm stressing right now is visualization. And to me, that's a skill that we should be using all the time, or I suggest that we use it frequently, but more so than ever, right now is a perfect time. You're not able to be as physically engaged, so why not try a new skill? Why not keep refining that skill if you already use visualization? I read a great example about Drew Brees, who during the season and his off week, he visualizes an entire football game. And I know that's asking a lot when we're in season, but to me, that's fun. Why not try that right now? And just mentally seeing yourself performing the skills that you do. Last comment on that real quick is 3 visualization reps equals 1 physical rep.
Interesting. 3 visual representations, 3 visual reps equals 1 physical rep. And
Yes.
Tami, when you say rep, if someone was, say, trying visualization for the first time, how might you recommend that they start? Would they pick a skill that they're already good at? Would they pick a skill that's more challenging?
I would pick a skill that I'm already good at.
Okay.
And I suggest closing your eyes and seeing in as much detail and as using as many of your senses as possible. And it's like a movie in your head. To me, it's fun. I went to bed every night visualizing the game winner. And, that's fun.
Yeah. Did you get to live out any of those moments in reality?
I did, actually. And it was
I was gonna
surprising how calm I felt when I got to that moment because I had seen it so many times in my head.
Fascinating. Thank you, Tami. VJ, Piers, related to visualization, is there anything that's come up for you in the work that you're doing currently, given the absence of sport, that you feel might be beneficial to those on the call today?
Yeah, so I'll piggyback off of Tami with that visualization. I think mindfulness or meditation kind of goes hand in hand with that. So one thing that I'm kind of working with my clients now is applying that mindfulness to stay in the moment. We're basically flexing that concentration muscle. Now that we can do it in a quiet room, and how long can we hold our attention to what we do want to concentrate on? That's just going to get us better prepared for when we're in a gym packed with people or on the football field packed with people, whatever it is. Then I'm going to be better prepared to be able to stay in the moment that I do want to focus on the now.
And VJ, do you have a favorite exercise that is a go-to for you, or one that you use with clients or with athletes for developing that concentration muscle, for being able to flex and stay in the moment?
Yeah, so what I love for my athletes to do is to record themselves so they hear their own voice. And this is where I kind of tie in the visualization. So they'll record themselves and then they'll just play it back and listen to the visualization and the meditation at the same time to go through that game-winning shot or to go through that defensive rotation.
So are they talking, when you say record themselves, are they saying out loud what it is they're seeing in their mind related to the picture Tami was just referencing?
Exactly. Yeah. And you have a little bit more control with that. You can write it down and then read it so it's more in real time. And the example I give is if it takes you 70 seconds to run a 400, but in your mind's eye, you're running that in 5 seconds, that's not very applicable. So
that's a great improvement, though. Talk about being a good performance coach.
Yeah.
Very cool. What about the administrators and the coaches that are on the call? When we talk about visualization, if they were going to do a similar exercise related to recording themselves, what might you encourage those individuals to visualize?
Staying calm. And what is it that they focus on to be able to go to that place? Because there's so many stressors. There's so many things that arises, anxiety, depression, all these kinds of different feelings. So being able to talk yourself through to just stay in the moment. And what does that look like for you? And so a lot of times it's going to be different per person, but just kind of go back to that space that brings you back to the now.
Perfect. And Piers, I know when the 3 of us were on a call earlier, VJ just mentioned flexing that concentration muscle. And you brought up a fascinating point about the differences between, I believe it was focus, attention, and maybe concentration. Can you talk more to our audience today about that point specifically and the differences between each?
Yeah, and so part of it is just understanding we often use those 3 words really interchangeably. And most people will know what we're talking about, but can we improve our attention, focus, and concentration if we have a better understanding of the different words? And so attention really is like, what are all the things that I could be attending to, right? So Betsy, you were attending to me when I was telling you this before, but like you might not have been fully focused on it, right? Where you had narrowed in, because I think you were also writing notes. So your attention was shifted between 2 things, right? So if attention is kind of all of the things that we could be taking in, then focus would be more along the lines of, okay, I'm going to narrow in and draw my attention to a smaller point in one place. And then concentration is how long can I hold that focus in one place? And as coaches, I think that's really really helpful, because how often, do we hear, oh, come on, focus. on what and for how long, and what are all the things that could be distracting me, right? So like as coaches, we can improve our communication by understanding the nuance of those words. So, hey everyone, I need your attention. Please look at me. Good. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to focus on me. I'm going to explain the drill. So first listen to me, then we're going to look at the cones here on the field. Okay, and now I need you to concentrate as you're going through on your first touch. Soccer example, right?
Right.
So helping your athletes to understand those words can help them to fine tune their game.
And I love that, especially as a communication specialist, how we use language to direct their focus and their attention and their concentration and the nuances between each. Because as you said, we use these in place of each other often. And yet when we dive into the specifics, they mean very different things. And what that looks like for our student athletes is very different as well. You mentioned, Piers, about attention. And something that I've heard often from coaches is, especially at a distance, it's harder to hold their student athletes' attention. Additionally, the research on Gen Z says that they have a shortened attention span because in part of the ways that they've been overstimulated by technology since the time they were born. Vera Jo, when we last talked, you mentioned an interesting concept. We were talking about how today's student athlete is saying, well, I feel so bored. And many people are experiencing boredom. And you referenced a perspective that I thought was really interesting that I'd love for you to share with everyone that's on the call. Can you talk a little bit about boredom and what it means to you?
Yeah, I think boredom is good. It is good to be bored. And what we were talking about when we were all kids is, we didn't have these cell phones in our hands. So when we were bored, that created a spark of creativity. Okay, so when I'm bored, then that next step is going to be the equalizer, I guess. So when I'm bored, I go out and I paint something. I go out and I draw something. I mean, if I was a kid, I go out and I make a mud pie. But that creativity is sparked from that place of boredom because my mind has a place to just be.
And for those that are unpracticed at the being, and we realize that whether you're an administrator, a coach, a student athlete, this time of isolation, this time of physical distance from our social circles has allowed us to be with ourselves, be with our thoughts specifically, in a way that may be very unpracticed for some people. Piers, can you talk a little bit about presence and any specific exercise that you have for developing presence for someone that's unpracticed at sitting with their own thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I could go a couple different directions there. The first one that I want to go is really specifically sitting with our thoughts, right? So in the moments of boredom, often what happens is I think we become uncomfortable being inside of ourselves. And so we reach for a phone or a TV or something else. And so to start developing that comfortability, just being, one of the first things that I would say would be to write some thoughts down. Because part of it is we get uncomfortable with our thoughts because our thoughts in our head feel so real. And it's not until we can get them on paper and look at them from a distance with a little bit more objectivity that we can realize, okay, is that even true? How true is it? And what does it mean for me, right? So to be able to analyze our thoughts. So I would definitely suggest as a number one strategy, like write some thoughts down, get distance from your thoughts. So that would be the first place that I would go in terms of sitting with our thoughts more often.
Excellent. And talking about our thoughts, writing them down, and you mentioned getting perspective on our thoughts. Is this really true? How is this affecting me? Tami and I have known each other for about 6 years now. Tami was the first person to tell me a story called This Is Good. And it's one of my favorite stories about gaining perspective on adversity. And Tami has a book that is coming out any day now. I know the final draft is coming back from the publisher, called This Is Good. Tami, I'm wondering if you would be so kind for those on the call that haven't heard the This Is Good story, knowing that it's so powerful perspective and specifically overcoming adversity. Would you share the This Is Good story with us?
I would love to. I heard this story, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and it really made an impact on my life. It's an African folktale, and there's a king who has his best friend that's always with him. And he keeps him with him all the time because no matter what happens, the best friend reminds him this is good. So one day they go out on a hunting party and he loads the king's rifle for him. Well, it backfires and blows the king's thumb off. So the king is irate and he sends his best friend to jail. All the way to jail, the best friend was like, this is good. This is good. He gets to jail and other people in the jail were like, you're an idiot. This isn't good. Your best friend just threw you in jail. Nope, this is good. So in the meantime, he's in jail for a year and a half, and the king goes out on another hunting party. Well, they're captured by a band of cannibals, and the cannibals were going to kill them and eat them one by one. Well, they were very superstitious and did not believe in killing or eating anything that wasn't whole. They saw the king's thumb was missing, so they released him. He was like, oh my gosh, my best friend saved my life. And he runs back to jail, gets down on his knees, please, 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 please forgive me. His best friend, of course, says, this is good. And he was like, I know it was good for me, but I've wasted a year and a half of your life. The best friend was like, nope, this is good. And I often like to follow up that with a question of what was good for the best friend in jail. And you get various answers, but most likely he would have been with the hunting party and he could have been killed and eaten. So hopefully it's a little dramatic from what we're dealing with, but I like to use examples with athletes I work with. What is good about an injury? Instead of thinking, poor me, I can't play, all right, you get to work on something else. Maybe you needed a break. This one's a little harder for me, but what's good about a loss? And successful teams always point back at a loss as that was our turning point, or we learned something important for it. So we can go through various ideas, but I think more than ever, it resonates right now. And can we find the good in this COVID crisis right now? What is good about it? And trying to focus more on the good instead of what's been taken away right now.
And I appreciate you telling this story in part because that seems to be a central question for administrators, coaches, and student athletes right now is what is good about a pandemic landscape? What is good about not having our student athletes be able to be together and to practice their sport in the same way that they're used to? What is good about an unknown future in the athletics world? Can I hear from each of you some examples of what you've either personally found to be the good in this time, or what you would encourage others to look for in terms of what could be good as benefits or positives to come out of our current situation?
Sure, I'll jump on. Mostly for me, I would say during this time, it's really forced me to slow down a bit and even understand, hey, what is important. And I always go back to kind of like Tammy's, this is good. My coach, my college coach always used to say, you need to focus on what you can do versus what you can't do. Focus on the can. So I'm even myself asking my athletes, what can you do? Right, you can't go to practice, but there are certain things that you can do during this time. So let's focus on those. And so we're focusing on strengthening relationships with our teammates, right? Everybody's at home struggling with the same thing. Same storm, different boats, of course, but how can I improve that relationship maybe with that teammate that I'm not so close with? And the ones that I am close with, how can I get even closer? How can I create a bond so when we do get back on the court or the field, that relationship is even stronger than before and we can just take off from a place that we never were before.
Great. And I love that idea of same storm, different boats, because there is a distinct difference in reality for how many people are going through this environment, given their home environment or the resources that they do or don't have access to. I want to circle back on that in a minute. Piers, Tami, tell us a little bit about the good that you found or that you would encourage others to look for during this time.
I think for me, it's a little bit of the good that I found and definitely a lot of the good that I'm hoping other people will start to see, which is that this is I think there's been a frustration for a lot of coaches, leaders in any profession, really looking at people, looking at ourselves and like wanting more and not having the time to do it, right? Like not having the time to figure out how to get more or not having the time to maybe take, reflection for ourselves and to truly grow. So I feel like so many coaches and leaders have been like, there's just something has to shift. Well, something is shifting, right? And so I think in the uncertainty, in the unknown, I think that in and of itself, while it is scary and frightening and hard and real losses are happening for people on all kinds of different levels, I think in a sense, the event itself, like this time that we are in, is good because everyone, no matter where you are in this storm, in terms of thriving or struggling, is going to grow. there is growth in real struggle. There is growth in, deliberate reflection. And so I think that no matter where we are or how we're dealing with it, people are going to grow and they're going to come back on the other side of this as changed people. And I think the idea is, how deliberate can we be about that?
I love that. The choice and change. Tami, what's good?
What has been good for me is it's forced me to get out of my comfort zone. I would much rather be in person, and I feel more comfortable being in person with athletes and teams. But this has forced me to be more open to Zooms. It's enabled me to connect a lot better with people, to meet peers, to get to know Vera Jo better. That's just two examples. So I think it's a great opportunity to develop new skills or work on different skills in whatever role that we are in. A lot of people, when I've asked on my Facebook page for This Is Good book release, what is good? And the responses I've received have been overwhelming and exciting and encouraging.
As an optimist, I love finding the good. And I think that's why I latched onto the story so much when you first told it to me, Tami. What I've heard a lot of in this time, given the different roles that people on this call are playing, whether it's administrator, coach, student athlete, parents especially, is yes, while there are items that are good about this time, there's also a lot that's not good. And I'll put it in the notes when I send out the recording to all who registered. I saw a video recently. The account on YouTube is called Probably Tomfoolery. And it's a split screen, same guy. The top is an optimist, the bottom is a pessimist, and they have a dialogue together about this pandemic landscape. And what was interesting is, as a natural optimist, so many of the pessimist points were extremely valid. And I'm listening, and I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, what are you going to say to that? Because you can't argue with that. And what I learned is it was less about an argument and more about a choice. And Piers, you mentioned about the choices that we have in this time. Vera Jo, controlling what you can control. These are absolutely related to mental skills like resilience and being able to overcome adversity. Piers, what I enjoyed about your explanation just a moment ago was that you didn't say that we have the opportunity to come out better, but that we have the opportunity for growth and that we can change during this time and that we get to choose that change. I'd love for you to speak specifically to maybe the student athletes on the call whose home environment is not set up for them to be able to proactively work on things they might choose. So they might be wanting to develop a skill set, or they might want to spend more time on academics, but they're now become the primary caretaker for younger brothers or sisters, or they have parents that are experiencing unemployment, or they have a home environment in which they have no private space to themselves. Can each of you speak a little bit to what recommendation or resource or words of advice would you give to anyone who's experiencing a less than optimal environment for growth currently? It's one of those easy questions.
Thoughts I have about that, are really one of the biggest things this comes up for me anytime I talk about failure with athletes. And anytime that I talk about failure with athletes, what it really comes down to is like this deep understanding of self and connectedness to other people and a fear of losing that. And so thinking about like future athletes, and we want people to come back confident and skilled, and they've been practicing, but not everyone is going to have the opportunity to do that. And when I see really great performers, the ones who are willing to like step out there, put themselves on the line, truly compete with all the vulnerability that takes, the ones who do that best are those who have a strong sense of self, who step onto that field because they know they could get legitimately pummeled by another team and stand up and go, well, that was embarrassing for sure, but like, I'm okay. Like, I am okay. And to develop that sense of I am okay, I think what we need to see more of in our athletes is a broader sense of identity. We, as athletes, often from a very young age, I was one of those people, I'm guessing, plenty of people on this call, the three of you, we identify, we're like, okay, I'm an athlete. Here's the thing I'm good at. And we tie our worth to that thing. That makes it really easy for in the moment when we fail athletically to then feel like a failure as a person. that makes failing really scary. If we can broaden our identity to say, yeah, man, during this time of COVID, I helped this house stand up. I cooked dinner. I know how to help my younger siblings learn virtually. I went out and did some odd jobs to help my family earn money. You can start to broaden your identity. So leverage that. And that doesn't matter. Maybe you're forced into that situation, but if you have the privilege not to be forced into that situation, find that situation. Be able to broaden your identity far beyond that of an athlete.
And Piers, I remember on your Instagram story, this was a few weeks ago, you gave a visual of an exercise that you did for yourself related to creating an identity separate from what might be a go-to for us is I'm a student athlete, or I'm a coach, or I'm an athletic administrator. Can you talk a little bit about that exercise for those that are listening?
Yeah, so I did really simple exercise. It's called I am ... And the idea is just to think about that prompt. I am what? Like, what would you fill in there? And to pick 5 to 7 words. They could be values that you're trying to live into every day, things, beliefs. They could be roles that you play. They could be labels that you identify with. And to put them, in one place. So I am all of these things. An athlete and coach and administrator will probably still be on there. And it's just about broadening that out further. So I'm a coach, but am I also steady? Am I a parent? Am I loved? Right? Really trying to get into what are all the things that I am and filling it out from there.
Thank you. Awesome. Tami and Vera Jo, thoughts on resiliency skills or skills for specifically working with how we can broaden our identity, not just as an athlete or as a student, but developing our self-identity and our sense of self-worth into something more.
All right, so one of the things that I jotted down is, as Piers was talking, not an exact situation where everybody's going to have a place to be their best selves right now, but talking about that adversity. Is that not what we're training ourselves to be in times of, pressure, whether that's taking a test, whether that's performing in a big time game, whether that's getting up and speaking in front of hundreds of people? So understanding that we are going through these adverse times, and that is building up mental toughness, whether we know it or not. And when we look back at it in hindsight, I think hindsight is a great teacher. We will see the lessons that we learned later down the road. And another thing, talking on failure, that I'll touch on that Piers mentioned, is you have to see failure as an event, not an identity. Failure is something that happens to you. It's not who you are. So yes, maybe we lost that big time game. Maybe I failed that test, but I have to see it as something that happened to me and not my identity. I need to learn how to separate the two.
Vera Jo, can you say a little more about, knowing that hindsight is a great teacher and being able to look back on this time months from now, whether we're currently aware of it or not, the ways in which we are going through adversity and overcoming adversity simply by continuing to be present and exist in this time. Are there any recommendations that you have about exercises for either reflection or developing awareness so that it's easier to look back and say, oh yeah, remember I was feeling this way or thinking this, and recognizing, being able to learn from that in the future?
Yep. So the best way for me is just, Piers had mentioned earlier, jot some notes down. What are you thinking? And then when you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, that's what I was thinking, but you grew from that moment. Something that I have my athletes do, I call them your gremlins, those negative thoughts that you have day in and day out. I call them your gremlins. And if I were to show a picture, I would point out a creepy looking creature with fangs and, they're just not cute. And I would ask, would you allow those guys into your house? Would you allow them to cuddle up next to you? And they look at me like, no, yeah, exactly. They're ugly, creepy looking. No. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And they go, okay. But that is exactly what you do when you allow those negative thoughts to fuse with you. So what I would say is identify your gremlins, because most of us have the same gremlins over and over and over in life. They just tend to creep up on us. But if you can identify them, if you know what they are, you take their power away. But without you doing that, they're just continue popping up time and time and time again. So the first step is to, yes, identify those gremlins. And then the second step would be to flip the script. And like Piers mentioned, the I am statements, I call them go-to statements. So I know what my gremlins are, but I'm going to have the flipping the script to have the positive outcome to it ahead of time. Because as you all know, in the moment, it's hard to come up with something right then and there. I mean, for me, I'm unable to do that. Maybe some of you guys are better with that than I am, but I have to come up with that ahead of time. So then when I identify that gremlin and I tell myself, oh, I can't do this, you don't belong here, gremlin. And I've already established the positive, flipping the script, my go-to statement on what I'm going to say when I do identify that in the moment.
Can you give us an example, Vera Jo, of when you say flip the script and a go-to statement? Can you give us an example of what that might be? So a gremlin that you've identified, and then what an example of flipping the script looks or sounds like?
Yeah, so a common example that I use is when I was in Greece. And it was my first practice there, first professional practice, the only Division II player there in the entire country of Greece. And I was telling myself, I don't belong here. That was my gremlin that just took hold of my mind. And later, I didn't have the positive flip the script in that moment, but later it just kind of kept coming and coming and coming. And I had to identify my go-to statement was, I do belong. I put in just as much time, practice just as much, practice just as hard. I do belong. So once I identified that, that is what I held on to in those moments. I focused on the positive, and then that negativity just kind of seemed to wither away. So just focusing on
with truth, knowing what is true instead of what's true right now in my mind.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Tami, can you talk to us about growth, about failure, diversity? You can choose your own adventure here at this point.
Well, I'm going to jump on what Vera Jo just said on choosing to focus on the positive. One of my favorite sayings is, what you focus on grows. So what you're choosing to focus on right now is what's growing on the inside of you and will help the direction of your life, be it negative or positive. Along with that, one thing that I like to teach is staying in the moment, staying in the present moment. And we all know or have heard how the best athletes are able to just be present in that moment. And you can take that beyond athletics. But one thing I really strive to teach is becoming aware of your five senses. The more you can engage in those senses, the more you can be in the present moment. And an acronym that I like to use with that is WIN, W-I-N, what's important now. And it's just a great catch if the brain starts fast forwarding of thinking, oh no, what's going to happen with COVID? Or you're still hanging on to a mistake you just made in the game. You catch yourself? No, what's important now?
Tami, how would you relate WIN to what you just said about your five senses and checking in with those, cultivating? Is there a practice or an exercise that you would recommend anyone can do to either start to identify more closely with what it is that they're sensing in their five senses, or how to apply that sense to the application of what's important now?
On an easy level that we all can do right now, and it's one thing I've been trying to do on my walks with my dogs, and you can do it even if you don't have dogs, but just as I walk around the neighborhood of testing myself. All right, how many sounds can I hear? And really just being present to where I can hear as many sounds as possible. After I do that, I move to how many different things can I notice that was different, because it's the same route, different from yesterday. How many different sensations and feelings can I feel, from feeling the leash to feeling my, shoe hit the pavement? And it's just a great exercise that I'm learning is helping me create habits of feeling and hearing and seeing in the moment.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you. And for those that don't have dogs, this is a great time to considering adopting a pet. They are wonderful and they give great hugs. We can't hug other people right now, but we can sure hug our dogs. What else has come up for you? I'm curious. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump on
Absolutely.
that? So those last two comments, and just this idea of present moment focus, and to really good strategies, we have to practice being present. And I love all of the senses on the walk, right? And the cue of what's important now. So one of the things to highlight is true optimal performance, right? Which is what people want, and people in all domains really want that true optimal performance. So flow state performance. That type of performance doesn't happen without present moment focus. And so like, if that's what you want to get, you need to really tune into these strategies of like, how do we practice that? Because if we aren't practicing being present, then it's not going to happen in the moment that we need it most. And way too much to go into here, but just a couple things. So the cue of what's important now, one of the things that we know is a flow trigger, so helps us to get into flow state faster, is having clear goals, right? And that what's important now cue can help us to say, what's my goal right now, right? That can help ease all the thinking that's happening in my brain and start to narrow it down. So one thought there. And another athlete example, so walking your dog, practicing staying present. It's also, if you're out there doing distance learning, and you talk, Bets, about Gen Z and all of the screens and our kind of lack of attention, start training your attention. So my challenge to those on this call right now, how many of you are dual tasking? You're listening to us, but you also have your phone up. You're like, so put the phone down. Not saying we're most important, right? You don't have to do it now, but like practice when you're Zoom learning, when you're on a work call, one screen, and just like make it take up the entire screen. So you're not checking your email, you're not doing anything else, but just be present. It's those small moments that can help train our brain and train us to be comfortable in those moments. So we have to absolutely practice being present. The other thing is, for coaches, thinking about how are you setting up your athletes, your environments, your structures, your rhythms to facilitate that present moment focus and that flow state. Like if you don't want your athletes thinking too much, like, oh, my athletes think too much. And then I ask a coach, I'm like, tell me what like the 30 minutes before a game looks like. And they got an extra like last minute scouting report or a quick change of game plan. Yes, your athletes are going to be thinking, right? So we have to think about how we structure our environment to make sure that we're utilizing the flow cycle most effectively to get to that present moment focus.
Awesome. I love that. And you were talking about that practicing, focusing our attention and not being distracted. And it brought to mind, there's a quote from the book Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. And she talks about, there's a whole chapter on be here, prepared to be nowhere else. And that second part, we hear be where your feet are all the time. We hear the importance of being present. And Piers, you related it beautifully to, if we want to achieve that flow state, we have to practice the discipline of presence and being present. For me, that second part of be here, prepared to be nowhere else, takes into account that there are things that we need to do or that we need to practice in order to allow ourselves to stay fully focused, to give our attention to what's in front of us. You mentioned on our group call the other day that we've gotten in this habit, all of us, coaches, administrators, student athletes, of diverting our attention. And I don't text when I drive, but when I stop at a stoplight, I almost always pick up my phone. And yesterday I was driving and the hand went to do it and I was like, oh, remember what Piers said, like practice your attention, right? And so I started noticing what I could notice at the same stoplight that's by my house. But it is something that we need to practice. And Tami, it looked like you were going to say something. There's something you want to say before I dive into the next question that came to mind.
I just wanted to add to that, as simple as it sounds, how powerful it is, but your eyes have a strong control of your focus. And so I think it's important that where your eyes go, your focus goes. And so that's an easy way to start with the practice as well. When someone's talking, actually your eyes focus on them, you're more likely to retain what they said. So I think that's an important point I wanted to stress there.
Excellent. And this leads a little bit into one of the questions that's come up. And again, if you have a question, please put it into the chat or the Q&A box. A question came up and I'll read it to you all now. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts around structure specifically. So the question is, for coaches who cannot directly access sport or performance specialists, what are some activities or tips to build stronger mental toughness, particularly for developmental ages of 14 to 18? We've talked a little bit about some examples of how to do that. So I'd like to focus a little more on the second part of the question, which is, additionally, how might one better utilize online platforms such as Google or Zoom for engagement with one's team? So thoughts about things that you've done with clients that you're working with, teams you're working with, or recommendations you have for how do we engage or structure that face-to-face time in a way that allows our student athletes specifically to start to practice some of the mental skills we know will benefit them down the line.
I think it's important first and foremost is to have structure with it. I think too many coaches say, hey, you need to work on the mental skills, but dedicating X amount of time on a certain schedule. And then that relays the importance to your athletes. So that's as important as the material. Because if the material's haphazard, they're thinking, oh, it's not important, or it's just something the coach is adding right now. So I would have a schedule of the first part of practice, the last part of practice, on however many X days that you plan to do that. Right now, I think Zoom is a great way for connection. Teams that are connected are going to go to battle and not give up, quite as easy with each other. So really, how are you connecting through Zoom or through all the other technology that we have? And that ties into, that is another great thing about right now. Our teams, we should be really connecting our teams and building stronger connections right now and using that time.
I love that, Tami. And personally, that resonates for me because when I talk about communication, especially championship communication, of all the possible things that go into winning a championship, why focus on communication? And it's because the buzzword most often associated with high-performing teams is chemistry. And chemistry is formed through connection. And at the heart of connection is communication. And I hear from coaches and administrators specifically during this time, what do I need to ask them to do? I know they're challenged in their different environments. I know resources are different boats, as Vera Jo mentioned before. What do we need to do so that we can come back and be as competitive as we can be during this time? And I think you answered that perfectly, Tami, in that it's less about the skill development, about the physical conditioning. Are those important pieces? Yes. And the playing field has been leveled a little bit in terms of our ability as individual teams and programs to practice those specific areas during this time. The teams that may fare best or perform best long-term coming out of this COVID landscape are those that have intentionally focused on connection. So I love that you brought that up. Thank you for that.
Piers, I'm going to add real quick. I'm sorry, I know Piers was going to speak, but I like to open up every Zoom call with asking the group, all right, give me 5 this is good examples. And so you're just starting on a positive note and getting them to focus on what is good. And maybe you don't even need to talk about your sport, but again, that allows time for connection and as well as shifting the focus to what is positive.
Thank you.
If that's okay, I'm gonna piggyback off of that too. Something that I do before we start any kind of Zoom session, in person, whatever, it's a PGC thing, but we start off the call with celebrations. I celebrate Betsy for bringing this together. Whatever it is, I'm celebrating Tami, I'm celebrating Piers. And the more you do that, the more trust you establish. And then we get to know each other a little bit better. And then that trust is established a little bit deeper each time we meet, time and time again. So just giving celebrations every time we meet.
And Vera Jo, it's ironic you mentioned that because this is one of the books I have on my desk. It's Trust Factor by Paul Zak, and they call it ovation. But he takes the word oxytocin and then uses something that anybody can do, behaviors that we can use with our teams. And he talks about corporate teams. Everything in the book is translatable to athletic teams, but that idea of celebration and ovation, it sets a tone, a different tone that facilitates connection. And that's so important during this time. And we can do that still at a distance from each other. Piers, please add what I know is on your mind.
Well, now there's like 4 things on my mind.
Yeah,
but I'll
perfect. Let's hear all of them.
The original one, like going back to the question of, how can we as coaches use the virtual platform to help our athletes with mental toughness. One thought I have that's free and I think lends itself fairly well to this virtual platform is to do a team book club. There's lots of really great, like accessible sports psych books out there. I think all of us have talked about, reading Mind Gym. There's a whole list of books that you could go with, like Legacy, but have everyone on the team read the same mental skills book. And then on a Zoom call, take it a chapter at a time. Have people, wow, like this really stood out to me, like, coach, you're really bad at this. Like, have just like a really open conversation about the content of the book as structure. So that way you don't have to depend on, can you afford to hire one of us? Do you have time to bring one of us on? There's lots of great resources out there, but it's about finding the structure. And I think the general book club structure is like an easy toe dip into doing that on your own.
I love it. And for those that are listening, I will include book recommendations from Tami and Piers and Vera Jo in the show notes from today, along with the recording. So if you're looking for resources similar to what Piers just mentioned, we'll be able to give you some great starting points. I want to start to touch on some of the questions that have come in. Thank you for those that have written in. Chad asked, Piers, specifically in relation to your comment about flow state performance doesn't happen without noticing and being aware of the ability to be present. What does that look like in motion? So during a game or play, how do we practice that in motion without it being a distraction, our senses? So anything that you can talk about specifically about what does that look like in practice, right? So if I'm, let's say, practicing skills at home remotely, or I'm practicing an element of my game, what does it look like to be present in that moment as I'm working on my skills?
Yeah, great question. And so I think what I would say is, let me take it to like a in-person team setting first, and then I'll take it to a like COVID individual setting second. So in that first setting, we all think of like a typical practice for your sport. And so maybe coach introduces a drill, you get everyone on the same page. Often, and I get this as a coach, I really get this, athletes start doing the drill and we blow the whistle or we yell, stop, and we want to have a coachable moment. So coachable moments are great, and we need to also train our athletes to perform without our interference. And so I think delineating in practice is, okay, for the first 5 minutes that we run this drill, I'm going to pause you a few times. We're going to do some coachable moments to make sure that you're really getting what I want you to get. And then we're going to take a break. We're going to reset. And the second 5 minutes of the drill, we want you to play and we are not going to interfere. We want you to step on that court as a present moment focused athlete and as if you were stepping into a game. So finding ways to separate, when am I going to coach? Because coaches causes athletes to think. That's what we do as coaches. We want them to think about what they're learning. And yet then in the game, we're like, stop thinking.
Don't think, just play, right?
Yeah. And so let's do that deliberately, so that then also come game time, when we say to them, hey, don't think, just play, like trust your stuff. We have trained them, we've helped them learn how to do that.
Right.
So that's like the coaching environment. Unlike the COVID, I'm training on my own spectrum. What I would say is it's the same for us as individuals. So maybe I'm using an app to train my foot skills. I'm training some type of technique, and I want to really be thinking about exactly my body movement, the mechanics. What does that look like? And so maybe I do 5 minutes again where I'm really focused on it. And then I give myself, take a deep breath, 5 minutes where I'm just going to kind of flow with it and see what it feels like and try to be present moment focused. And then for both situations, team and individual, after the present moment, step away and do an evaluation. Look back on that time, do the thinking afterwards.
That's great. Tami, Vera Jo, anything to add related to practicing presence in the moment, what that looks like?
Yeah, so a lot of times, and I know coaches are great at causing challenging and adverse situations in practice, because we all know the harder practice is, the easier the game's going to be. And coaches, we're great at doing that. And something that I'll ask the coaches is, when you cause those challenging, adverse situations and your team doesn't perform the way you expected it to be, how often do you debrief with your team? How often do you get into your minds and ask, what was on your mind? What was your fear? What held you back from performing your best? A lot of times we overlook that and we don't address the issue at hand. We just say, oh, they're mentally weak. Do they even know what your definition of mental toughness is? Is it the ability to stay in the moment? Is the ability to run the play correctly? Do they know what that is? And if they did, if we were to better describe, or they know that definition, then they may be able to perform in better accordance to what you want them to do, your expectations.
Absolutely. And that's so important, especially, and I see it through a communication lens, but I like to say we can't expect what we don't express. Right? And oftentimes we as coaches have expectations that we have not articulated, or the definition, right? When you say, what does performance look like? Being really clear about not only what does it mean, but what does it look like, not just at a team level, but at an individual level. Because if you think about, extroverts and introverts, energy for those two individuals can look very different. For an introvert, giving great energy is not going to look the same as an extrovert giving great energy. And so where are our expectations and how do we define those? Really important point. Thank you. Tami, anything to add about performance, practicing presence in the moment while we're working on our skills?
I would just say one thing that you can do at home right now, whatever your sport may be, is really, let's say if it's basketball, then if you're shooting, out in your driveway, but just really using your senses to how that ball feels, what it looks like going through the net, just trying to use that time to bring the senses in. And the more you train that, then once you get into a game, it's going to be more natural.
Excellent. And that flow state is the ideal state that we're all seeking to achieve. Coming back to the questions, the name of the book and the author, the name of the book that I mentioned is Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. If you've yet to read it, Crucial Conversations is one that I recommend often. Great book, especially from a research perspective. The complement to that, I would say the more accessible, maybe, I don't know, there's a lot of stories in it. There's a lot of great quotes. For me, it felt more like a hug when we talk about difficult conversations, is Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. So great read. The other book that I showed is Trust Factor by Paul Zak. And we'll put, again, all these book recommendations in addition to the ones from Tami, Piers, and Vera Jo in the show notes. Another question came up. Would it be appropriate / good practice to ask athletes what their senses are picking up on or noticing while they're in the middle of a play? And I know, Piers, you just mentioned we stop them too often. Can you talk anybody a little bit about, would it be beneficial to ask a student athlete to articulate what it is that they're sensing when they're in the middle of a performance aspect?
I would go with, maybe we don't want them to articulate it in the moment, but I could certainly see as a coach, okay, hey, we're going to go run this drill. We give them a focus often, right? We're going to go run a drill, focus on your first touch. You're going to go run a drill, focus on XYZ. We do that technically and tactically a lot. I think it's definitely legitimate to add in the mental game there. Hey, we're going to go run this drill, and what I want you to focus on right now is just be aware of what you're thinking. We're going to go run this drill, and I want you to tune into, how does your body feel when you move this way, or what are your senses telling you? We have to be a little bit more clear in that direction of trying to actively think about it. It's more of a passive receiving of what's happening in my mind and my body versus what's happening in my mind and my body, right? And really trying to think about it and make it happen. So just, hey, as you do this, pay attention, to what's happening here. We'll talk about it after, and allowing the space to go through that uninterrupted.
Excellent.
I would agree with team sports, and maybe, golf and tennis, especially tennis is a little different, but I know in teaching tennis, kind of doing what Piers said, the first 5 minutes of coachable. And at the same time, I would often like to ask, where were your thoughts? Or asking something, what were you looking at? At getting them to verbalize it so it's planning in its head. And then the last 5 minutes, not asking that, just going. So I think there's combinations, and I'm not sure if there's a right or wrong. And that's the great thing about sports. We all operate differently, and our brains operate differently. But I do see an advantage of, at times, stopping and asking that based on your sport and situation.
And the benefit, Tami, simply of asking to double click on that is, even if your student athlete doesn't know, knowing that there's coaches that may work with a variety of ages of student athletes, even if your student athlete doesn't have a good answer for what they were thinking, simply asking the question is going to cause their attention to be drawn to their thoughts in the next repetition. If you want to go a little deeper with an athlete that you think is maybe saying, I don't know, as an escape from the question, is to follow up with, if you did know, what might you answer? It's a simple,
I like that.
It works every time, right? So we don't let them off the hook with, I don't know. It's, well, if you did know, what might you say? And then to pause and wait for them to fill that space. Vera Jo, was there something you were going to add there?
Yeah, I think sometimes as coaches, we also need to be aware not to overload the athletes. So if I were to have all of you right now memorize this sequence: 17, 26, 34, 18, 55, 61. Did you get it? What, maybe the first two?
Yeah,
okay,
short-term memory kicked in.
23, 20, 23, 20, 23, 20. Did you guys catch that? So if we can be concise in what we have them do, because if we give them too much, they're not going to remember any of it.
Yeah.
But if you're concise and you layer it effectively, then they're going to be better able to catch on to it.
Absolutely. And in seeking to be clear about what we want them to understand, from a communication standpoint, so often we say what it is that we want, and then we'll say, and I don't mean, and I don't mean, and it doesn't mean. And by the time we get through those, just like the example you gave, Vera Jo, we've now given them 6 things we don't mean, and they can't remember what it was we wanted in the first place. So excellent point. Thank you. Question that came up is related to that failure does not equal our identity. And Vera Jo, you mentioned, failure is an event, not an identity. How can we help our team/teammates work on this while holding that their identities may feel or be set up for more failure relative to their teammates? So examples, players without traditionally athletic body types, poorer players on financially comfortable teams, players older than their teammates, or a simpler example, players who aren't yet as skilled as their teammates. So if you've got an individual that simply by comparison is not set up to, it might be a bigger reach for them to feel like they can be successful or avoid being a failure, how can we help individuals in those situations work on developing a positive identity?
So I would always go back to, it's all about what you can control. So I have a lot of athletes, basketball athletes in particular, who are a little small for the game of basketball, and they know that. And I say, okay, and there's plenty of small players who have made an identity for themselves. So focus on your strengths. We can't stretch you to be taller. We know we can't do that. But what can you control? You're lower to the ground. So your center of gravity is lower to the ground. That gives you an advantage on defense. If you improve your ball handling because you are lower to the ground, that's going to be harder for anybody to pick your pocket. Are you going to be a lockdown defender? So what are the good things, Tami, right? This is good. This is good. What are the good things that I can take out of this? And then another thing I would say for it is to, again, go back to those gremlins. Identify what your fears are. Is expectation one of them? Is comparison another one? Because once I can identify it, then again, I'm taking the power away. And then I can flip the script and go to my go-to statements to focus on the positive.
Awesome. I love it. Tami, Piers?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say comparison is the thief of confidence. I mean, once you start comparing yourself, well, I'm not as quick, I'm not as tall, then you've given away your control and power instead of focusing on what you are or what you do bring. To add to the failure or to losing, I like to say, are you going to be a learner or a loser? And when we fail, I think it's important to shift the focus to what did we learn from it? And so we see it as an opportunity to grow instead of, oh, it was a loss, I don't want to think about it or deal with it.
Yeah, to echo both of those, the number one thing that I would share with people is adversity, failure, whichever one, right? So we perform and we fail, or golly, we just have a really hard time even performing because we're facing so much adversity. That is gold, right? So to completely reframe our understanding, our beliefs about failure, adversity, and struggle. We cannot have flow state. We can't have optimal performance unless we're struggling. And some of the new learning research out there is showing that students who struggle the most learn the most. And yes, it's in a learning environment, but I think we could probably show that to any sporting environment. Like those kids that, they kind of struggle to pick up the skill and they work on it and work on it, work on it. They often master it to a different level than the kids who got it the very first time. So first thought is, let's reframe our beliefs about failure and adversity. So stop kind of looking at it as a bummer, right? Or but really saying, ooh, how do I leverage this? What do I do here? How does this make me better? So that's one, is thinking adversity, struggle, failure is gold. The second piece in terms of working with teammates that I speak about a fair amount when I talk with teams and failure is tell people you love them. Period. And Betsy, we had talked about this.
Full stop. Right.
Yeah, full stop. Glennon Doyle in her new book does a great job of highlighting this point, which is we often want to say, it's okay, we love you no matter what. What? Unspoken message there is, you've disappointed us. Let's just affirm to people that we love them as they are, we love you, period. And expressing that and helping people, because that fear of failure comes from that fear of losing that connection. And so if we just reiterate to people over and over and over, that's as teammates, as parents, as coaches, emphasize the process over the outcome and just tell them that you love them more.
Yeah. And I can't think of a better way to close this session with talking about the best thing that we can possibly do in support of others, regardless of the relationship, is to choose kindness and to love each other through this time. And I'd like to close, since we're at time, I want to be respectful of everyone's time on the call. Tami, Piers, Vera Jo, thank you so much for gifting us your time. I'd like to cycle back through. We'll go VJ, Piers, and then Tami. How can people, if they'd like to learn more from you or start to follow you on social media, can you give us your handles for social? And then I'll also put those in the show notes. There was a question that came up about sharing the notes from today's session. Anyone that registered, there were about 300 people that registered, will get an email that has those book recommendations, the social media icons for all of our panelists today, in addition to a recording of the session. I will also post the recording on my social media. So at Twitter, it's at Betsy Butterick. On Instagram, it's Betsy_the Coach's Coach. Please feel free to share this. This was a free webinar. It's meant to be a resource to benefit as many people as possible. So if you found it valuable, please share it with others. Vera Jo, can we start with you and just tell people where they can find you, where they can follow you, any resources you'd like to point them to, and we'll close out our time together today.
Yeah, first and foremost, all of my contact information is on my website. That is mentalitysolutions.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me, just my name, Vera Jo Bustos. And then on Facebook, that is Mentality Solutions as well. And you can find my new book information is also on that Mentality Solutions site.
And congratulations on that book being released soon as well, Vera Jo. Thank you. Piers,
Everyone
how can we
needs
find
to
you?
read it. It's great. Sorry.
So my website is performancecolorado.com. There's a contact form there. You can reach out to me there. Instagram and Facebook are Performance Colorado or at Performance Colorado or Piers Kowalski, either one. And Twitter is at Performance COLO.
Awesome, thank you. Tami, how can we find you and read that new book, This Is Good?
Website is r2lc.com, short for Refuse to Lose Coaching. Twitter is R2L Coaching, as well as Tami, Tami Matheny. And This Is Good book. Please join me if you're on Facebook, the Facebook group This Is Good book launch, and it'll give you all the information as well as trying to create This Is Good movement.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your time. Again, I'm Betsy Butterick. All of my social media information you can find at betsybutterick.com. Like Piers, there's a contact form on the website if you'd like to reach out. For all of you in attendance, thank you for your time. We could talk about this for days. I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to share as much as you all did on this time. To everyone listening, we wish you a collective safe return to sport and look forward to growth during this time and keeping our mental skills sharp. So thank you, everyone. Take care and look forward to the recording later this afternoon.
Thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome. Bye, y'all.